I think the great weapon used to stifle critical thinking in 2019 is just a raw overwhelm of meaningless language, right? Just like constantly bombarding you at every turn, right? It's just meaningless, vapid doublespeak that just completely deadens you to language, right? And so again, when we're talking about the danger of repetition, it's just the repetition of just mindless garbage language, right? And what poetry does is return us to an awareness of the materiality of language and an awareness to language entering us as an active process and our metabolization of language and the speed at which we metabolize language, right? And so there is a sort of inherently political component to just reading. It doesn't even matter what, I mean, the poem doesn't have to be about war or whatever. The poem can be about a happy snowman, right? And it's still a political act to read that poem because it's changing your relationship to language.
Tonight's event is part of our ongoing Transnational literature series. It centers literary and artistic work around exile, migration, and diaspora with a focus on works in translation. Ilya Kaminsky was born in the former Soviet Union and is now an American citizen. He is the author of the book Dancing in Odessa and the co-editor of the Echo Anthology of International Poetry. Tonight, he will be reading from his new book, Deaf Republic, published by Grey Wolf earlier this year. Ilya, who lost most of his hearing at the age of 4, was one of the first poets I ever read with any kind of seriousness. I found a copy of Dancing in Odessa in a public library in Virginia and paid a very hefty late fee 3 months later. What I found then in his work, and what I still find, is a lyric that hums with true, deeply felt attention. In English, we don't have or acquire attention, we pay it as if it were a debt. Ilya's poems remind me of the things, intimacy, anger, mourning, everything to which I owe, and to which we owe our attention. Ilya has received a Whiting Award, a Lenin Literary Fellowship, and a Guggenheim Fellowship, and was named a finalist for the Neustadt International Prize for Literature. His work has been translated into over 20 languages. True. Kaveh Akbar was born in Tehran, Iran, and he is the author of the poetry collection Calling a Wolf, published with Alice James Books, and a chapbook, Portrait of the Alcoholic, from Sibling Rivalry Press. Kaveh is the founder of the website Dive Dapper, and his work has been published widely, including in The New Yorker, Poetry Magazine, The New York Times, The Paris Review, The Guardian, and many others. Kaveh is one of the poets whose work I most often turn to when the world feels overwhelming, or when the magic tricks of language stop feeling so magic. His poems work through the crisis points of faith, language, and desire, and consistently turn their faces back towards the real daily work of wonder. If, as Horace says, the role of the poet is to delight and instruct, then Kaveh Akbar is truly one of his generation's most vital poets. He is the recipient of a Ruth Lilly Fellowship from the Poetry Foundation, the Levis Reading Prize, and a Lucille Medwick Memorial Prize from the Poetry Society of America, and he teaches at Purdue University and in the low-residency MFA programs at Randolph and Warren Wilson College. I'm so excited to have both of these people with us here tonight, so please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Okay, don't be shy because we're going to be here for the next 24 hours. And I speak with a very heavy Russian accent, so hopefully by the 23rd hour you will all also speak with a very heavy Russian accent. But having said that, thank you so much, Brad, for these really kind words. And thank you everybody in this wonderful, wonderful bookstore for having us. Having said that, I'm just going to read you some poems, okay? I'm going to read 3 poems, 2 of them very short and one is longer, which is almost but not quite the first act of Deaf Republic, okay? We lived happily during the war, and when they bombed other people's houses, we protested, but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed, around my bed America was falling. Invisible house, by invisible house, by invisible house. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. In the 6th month of a disastrous reign, in a house of money, in a street of money, in a city of money, in a country of money, our great country of money. We forgive us lived happily during the war. So let's not do that. These are just poems. Let's not go. Okay? So what I'm about to read begins in a moment of crisis where a pregnant woman and her husband watch the soldiers shoot and kill a young deaf boy. And as a result of that, the whole city stands up at the protest by refusing to hear the authorities. Okay? It's called Deaf Republic, and the first piece is called Gunshot. Gunshot. Our country is a stage. When soldiers march into town, public assemblies are officially prohibited. But today, neighbors flock to the piano music from Sona and Alfonso's puppet show in Central Square. Some of us have climbed up into trees. Others hide behind benches and telegraph poles. When Petya, the deaf boy in the front row, sneezes, the surgeon puppet collapses, shrieking. He stands up again, snorts, shakes his fist at the laughing audience. An army jeep swerves into the square, disgorging his own sergeant. Disperse immediately! Disperse immediately. The puppet mimics in a wooden falsetto. Everyone freezes, except Petya, who keeps giggling. Someone claps a hand over his mouth. The sergeant turns toward the boy, raising his finger. You! You, the puppet raises a finger. Sonia watches her puppet. The puppet watches the sergeant. The sergeant watches Sonia and Alphonsus. But the rest of us watch Petya lean back, gather all the speed in his rod, and launch it at the sergeant. The sound we do not hear lifts the cars of the water. As soldiers march, Alfonso covers the boy's face with a newspaper. 14 people, most of us strangers, watch Sona kneel by Petya shot in the middle of the street. She picks up his spectacles, shining like two coins, balances them on his nose, observes this moment, how it convulses. Snow falls, and the dogs run into the streets like medics. 14 of us watch. Sona kisses his forehead, her shadow hole torn in the sky. It shimmers the park benches, porchlains. We see in Sonia's open mouth the nakedness of the whole nation. She stretches out beside the little snowman, napping in the middle of the street, as picking up its ballet, the country runs. Alfonso, in snow, you're alive, I whisper to myself. Therefore, something in you listens, something runs down the street, falls, fails to get up, I run, etc. With my legs and my hands behind my pregnant wife, etc. Down Watsinka Street I run, it only takes a few minutes, etc. to make a man. Darkness and insurgency begins. Our country woke up next morning and refused to hear soldiers. In the name of Petya, we refused. At 6 a.m., when soldiers compliment girls in the alleyway, the girls slide by pointing to their ears. At 8, the bakery door is shut and soldiers see Ivana's face, though he is their best customer. At 10, Mama Gala shouts, no one hears you, at the gates of the soldiers' barracks. By 11 a.m., arrests begin. Our hearing does not weaken. but something silent in us, strangeness. After curfew, families, if they're arrested, had homemade puppets out of the windows. The streets empty, but for the squeaks of strings and the tap-tap against the buildings of wooden fists unfit. In the ears of the town, snow falls. Alfonso stands, answerable. My people, you were really something fucking fun. On the morning of the first arrest, our men, once frightened, bound to their beds, now stand up like human mass. Deafness passes through us like a police whistle. Here the night testify. Each of us comes home, shuts at the wall, at the stove, at the refrigerator, let himself forgive me. I wasn't honest with you. Life, to you I stand answerable. I ran, etc. With my legs and my hands, etc. I ran down the Watson Street, etc. Whoever listens. Thank you for the fatherland, my town. Thank you for our argument that ends. Thank you for deafness, Lord. Such fire from a match you never lit. That map of bone and open it valves. I watched the sergeant aim. The deaf boy take iron and fire in his mouth, his face and the asphalt. That map of bone and open it valves. It is the air. Something in the air wants us too much. The earth is still. The tavern guards eat cucumber sandwiches. This first day soldiers examine the ears of bartenders, accountants, owners. The wicked in silence dust to soldiers. They tear Gora's wife from her bed like a door of a bus. Observe this moment, how it convulses. The body of the boy lies on the asphalt like a pepper clip. The body of the boy lies on the asphalt like the body of a boy. I touch the walls, feel the pulse of the house. And I stay up wordless and do not know why I am alive. We keep those the city, Sonia and I, between Zetas and Guardians and a wrought iron gates. Be courageous, we say, but no one is courageous. At the sound we do not hear lives the birds of the water. Before the war, we made a child. I kissed a woman whose freckles, sorrows, and neighbors. She had a mole on her shoulders, which she displayed like a medal for bravery. Her trembling lips when come to bed, her hair would have fallen in the middle of the conversation when come to bed. I walked in my barbershop of thoughts, yes, I vivid her love to bed on the chair of my hairy arms. But parted lips, but bite my parted lips, lying under the cool sheets. Sonia, the things we did. Soldiers aim at us. They fire. As a crowd of women flees inside the nostrils of searchlights. My God, have a photograph of this! In the piazza's bright air, soldiers drag Petya's body and his head upon the stairs. I feel through my wife's shirt the shape of our child. Soldiers drag Petya up the stairs and homeless dogs in as philosophers understand everything. Embark, embark. I, now on a bridge with no camouflage of speech, a body wrapping the body of my pregnant wife tonight. We don't die and don't die. The earth is still. A helicopter above my wife on earth. A man cannot flip a finger at the sky, because each man is already a finger flipped at the sky. Lullaby. Lullaby. Little daughter, rain, water, snow, and branches protect you. Whitewashed walls and neighbors' hands. Oh, child of my eyebrows, little lord of 6 pounds, my white hair keeps you asleep, lit. While the child sleeps, Sona undresses. She scrubs me until I spit soapy water peak. She smiles. A man should smell better than his country. Such is the silence of a woman who speaks again. Silence known. Silence is what moves us to speak. She throws my shoes and glasses in the air. I'm of deaf people and I have no country but a bus stop and an infant and a marriage bed. Soaping together, that is sacred to us. Washing each other's shoulders. You can fuck anyone, but with whom can you see it in water? Four a.m. bombardment. My body runs in a loam of street. My clothes is in a pillowcase. I look for a man who looks exactly like me, to give him my Sonia, my name, my shirt. It has begun. Neighbors glance at trolleys at the fish market, breaking all their moments in half. Trolleys burst like intestines in the sun. Pavel shots, I am so fucking beautiful, I cannot stand it. 2 boys, still holding tomato sandwiches, hopping at trolleys, light soldiers, aim at their faces, their ears. I can't find my wife where I eat my pregnant wife. I, a body, an adult male, awaits to explode like a hand grenade. It has begun. I see the blue canary of my country, pick breadcrumbs from each citizen's thighs. Pick breadcrumbs from my neighbor's hair. The snow leaves the earth and falls straight up as it should. To have a country so important. To run into walls, into streetlights, into loved ones as one should. The blue canary of my country runs into walls, into streetlights, into loved ones. The blue canary of my country. Watch their legs as they run and fall. A cigarette. Watch. Weißenke citizens do not know. They are evidence of happiness. In a time of war, each is a ripped out document of a laughter. Watch, God. They have something to tell that not even they can hear. If you climb a roof in a center square of this bombed out city, you will see one neighbor gives a cigarette, another gives the dog a pint of sunlit beer. You will find me, God, like a dumb pigeon's beak. I am pecking every which way at astonishment. Firing squad. On balconies, sunlight, on poplar sunlight, on our lips. Today, no one is shooting. A girl cuts her hair with imaginary scissors. The scissors in sunlight, her hair in sunlight. Another girl nicks a pair of shoes from a sleeping soldiers covered with light. A soldiers wake and gape at us, gaping at them. Of what do they see? Tonight, they shot 50 women at Lerner Street. I sit down to write and tell you what I know. A child learned the world by putting it in her mouth. A girl becomes a woman and a woman earth body. They blame you for all things, and they seek in the body what does not live in the body. The townspeople watch them take Alfonso. Now, each of us is a witness stand. Vasenka, watch his ass, watch for soldiers, throw Alfonso Brabinski on a sidewalk. We let them take him, all of us, cowards. What we don't say, we carry in our suitcases, our coat pockets, our nostrils. Across the street, they watch him with fire hoses. First he screams, then he stops, so much sunlight. A t-shirt falls off a clothes line, an old man stops, picks it up, presses it to his face. Neighbors line up to watch him drown on a sidewalk like a vaudeville lock. Ta-da! In so much sunlight, each of us is a witness stand. They take Alfonso, and no one stands up. Our silence stands up for us. I'm just going to do one more poem and I'll be out of your hair. Okay? This is the last poem in the book, and hopefully it will bring this a little bit closer home. It's called In a Time of Peace. Inhabitant of Earth for 40-something years, I have once found myself in a peaceful country. I watch neighbors open their phones to watch a cop demanding a man's driver license. When the man reaches for his wallet, the cop shoots into the car window, shoots. It is a peaceful country. We pocket our phones and go to the dentist to pick up the kids from school to buy shampoo and basil. Ours is a country in which a boy shot by police lies on a pavement for hours. We see in his open mouth the nakedness of the whole nation. We watch others, watch. The body of a boy lies on a pavement exactly like the body of a boy. It is a peaceful country, and it clips our citizens' bodies effortlessly, the way the president's wife trims her toenails. All of us still have to do the hard work of dentist appointments, of remembering to make a summer salad. Basil, tomatoes, it is a joy, tomatoes and a little salt. This is a time of peace. I do not hear gunshots, but watch birds splash over the backyards of the suburbs. How bright is the sky, and the avenue spins on its axis. How bright is the sky? Forgive me. How bright? Thank you.
It's such a wild thing to follow, Ilya. It feels like following a burning bush or something, you know. It's beautiful. Yeah, well, I know. Maybe this will be... No, because then I'm calling myself Moses. Yeah. just gonna abandon that metaphor. Hi, my name is Kaveh. I'm very, very excited to be here. I'm feeling very grateful to be here. I see a lot of faces of people who I love here. I was sitting on the stairs there, and there was this interesting thing happening where people were getting ready to walk out of the store, and then they heard the sound coming, and they were sort of, I watched it, they would be sort of like, what is that, you know, and then they sort of crept down the stairs, and it wasn't, no, well, some of them did, but it wasn't even an entirely, you know, it's not even that they were happy, like, they looked like, what is, you know, they looked almost like they had to get to the bottom of this, and I was thinking it's like this sort of siren song, and you're sort of like drawing these sailors to crash their ships into your shores or whatever. And those of you who actually made it here, I like to imagine that you're all sort of abandoning your Penelopes to be here with us. And, I'm just going to read some poems. This is a poem called Vines. There are fat, wet vines creeping into my house, through the pipes and through the walls, gentle as blue flames, they curl into my living. There is ice in my attic, sugar on my tile. I am present and useless, like a nose torn from a face and set in a bowl. When I saw God, I used the wrong pronouns. God bricked up my mouth hole. His fists were white as gold. There were roaches in my beard. Now I live like a widow. Every day a heave of knitting patterns and sex toys. My family speaks of me with such pride. Nunesh Turagan, they say. His bread is in oil. I thank them for that, and for their chromosomes, most of which have been lovely. I am lovely too. My body is hard and choked with juice, like a plastic throat stuffed with real grapes. My turn-ons include Ovid and fake leather. My turn-offs have all been ushered into the basement. I'll drink to them and to any victory. The vines are all growing toward the foot of my bed. I am waiting for them to come under the covers. I am the only person still in this house. There is no one here to look away. Do readings when I'm lucky enough to have a captive audience. I like to read poems by non-me people because I'm constantly spending time with my own poems. So this is a poem that I really love by the poet Anna Swer. Ilya and I were just talking about Anna, and she's a poet that I love a lot. Her name is actually Anna Swerishinska, sorry. See, and I know that but like, we all call her Anna Swer because we've decided that her last name is too difficult to say, which I just stumbled over it. But I feel like, you know, we say Gronkowski, or, you know, we say they're like equivalent. I just realized I was actually in Boston for that. But, you know, anyways, so Anna Swer. This is a poem that I really love. Her father was a painter. She writes a lot of poems for her parents. This is called I Washed the Shirt. For the last time, I washed the shirt of my father who died. The shirt smells of sweat. I remember that sweat from my childhood. So many years I washed his shirts and underwear. I dried them at an iron stove in the workshop. He would put them on unironed. From among all bodies in the world, animal, human, only one exuded that sweat. I breathe it in for the last time. Washing this shirt, I destroy it forever. Now, only paintings survive him, which smell of oils. Again, that's Anna Swer, S-W-I-R, if you want to Google her. This is a newer poem that I don't think I've read before in front of, and it's still becoming the thing that it is. So I'm grateful for your humoring it. It's called An Oversight. I made a dark that was all mine, an order. I gave it my least defensible vices, stacking them like bodies in the surf. An armada of nurses rode in to cherish the dead. Try harder, little moons, they said to the corpses, spooning eggplant and rice into each mouth. Winter followed winter. Horses coughed blood into the sand. Some pain stays so long, its absence becomes a different pain. Beautiful, too, that we can breathe drugs off house keys, through glass birds. They say it's not faith if you can hold it in your hands, but I suspect the opposite may be true. That real faith passes first through the body, like an arrow. Consider our whole galaxy staked in place by a single star. I fear we haven't said nearly enough about that. I appreciate that. I'm feeling very grateful for your being here, and I sense the reciprocity. You don't need to feel anxious about communicating that to me in this moment, I promise. I absolve you of that anxiety. I'm just going to read one more poem, but it's a little bit longer of a poem, so feel free to settle in and, lean your head on a neighbor if you ask your neighbor's permission first. This is just a little bit longer. This is called The Palace. It's hard to remember who I'm talking to and why. The palace burns. The palace is fire. And my throne is comfy and square. Remember, the old king invited his subjects into his home to feast on stores of apple tarts and sweet lamb, to fest on sweet lamb of stories. He believed they loved him, that his goodness had earned him their goodness. Their goodness dragged him into the street and tore off his arms, plucked his fingers out, plucked his goodness out like feathers. There are no good kings, only beautiful palaces. Who here could claim to be merely guilty? The mirror. My life growing monstrous with ease. To be an American, my father left his siblings believing he'd never see them again. My father wanted to be Mick Jagger. My father went full ghost. Ended up working on duck farms for 30 years. Once, asleep, a couch, he coughed up a feather. America could be a metaphor, but it isn't. Asleep on the couch, he coughed up a white duck feather. There are no doors in America, only king-sized holes. To be an American is to be a scholar of opportunity. Opportunity costs. Every orange I eat disappears the million peaches, plums, pears that I could have eaten but didn't. In heaven, opportunity costs. In her heaven, my mother grows peaches, plums, pears, and I eat them till I pass out and wake up in heaven. Wake up and eat some more. I couldn't dream of doing anything by halves. Whatever it is, I'll take the whole bouquet. Please, and soon. Are you still listening? Every person I touch costs me 10 million I'll never meet. Persons and persons. Inside each, a palace on fire. Inside each, Mick Jagger wearing a gorilla pelt coat covered in ostrich feathers. He calls it glamouflage. What's gone but still seen? Luckless soldiers, the pencil pushed slowly through my brother's tricep. What's gone but still seen? He didn't scream, just let his eyes water. If I smile even a little, they start sharpening their swords. And they're right. This is no time for joy. This is no time. The palace burns. Pencil pushes slowly through my brother's brother. What's still but seen gone? A king governs best in the dark, where you can't see his hands move. A king doesn't see us watching the king. We sew God's initials into our work shirts while our babies get thinner. The babies do not see us watching our babies get thinner. Our babies born addicted to fear of babies. Our babies gumming apples in the sun. America, the broken headstone. America, far enough away from itself. Hello, this is Kaveh speaking. I wanted to be Keats, but I've already lived 4 years too long. Hello, this is Keats speaking. It is absurd to say anything now, much less anything new. Hello, this is no one speaking. Hibiscus bloom, wet feathers, a tiny thumb of ash. To be American is to be a hunter. To be American, who can be American? To be American is to be what? A hunter? A hunter who shoots only money. No, not money. Money. I have a kitchen device that lets me spin lettuce. There is no elegant way to say this. People with living hearts that could fit in my chest want to melt the city where I was born. At his elementary school in an American suburb, a boy's shirt says, "We did it to Hiroshima, we can do it to Tehran." At his elementary school in an American suburb, a boy's shirt says, "We did it to Hiroshima, we can do it to Tehran." The take-home trophy, roasted goat baying on the spit. A boy's shirt says, "We did it to Hiroshima, we can do it to Tehran." He is asked to turn his shirt inside out. He is asked his insides out. After he complies, his parents sue the school district. Our souls want to know how they were made, what is owed. These parents want their boy to want to melt my family, and I live among them. Palace throne, comfy, burning. I draw it without lifting my pen. I draw it fat as creation, empty as a footprint. How to live. Reading poems, breathing shallow, spinning lettuce. America, the shallow breath, how to live, the shallow trap, America catching only what is too small to eat. The dead keep warm under America, while my mother fries eggplant on a stove. I am not there. I am elsewhere in America. I am always elsewhere in America, writing this, writing this, writing this. English is my mother's first language, but not mine. I might have said, Padamchan. I might have said, Khudafis. Sizzling oil, great fists of smoke, writing this. The first insect drawn by man was a locust. Art is where what we survive survives. Sizzling oil, great fists of smoke, art, sizzling oil, art. My mother fries eggplant. The first insect drawn by man survives. Who to kiss the prom queen? Brain pulsing like an oyster. Who to win the war? America rises, covered in the tiny grains of its own making. Fresh bread pocked with flour dust. Mistyping in an email, I write, I lose you so much today. Then leave it. Forbidden mercies, water bowl held to a prisoner's lips, windmills spinning around like drunk teenagers. Any document of civilization is also a document of barbarism, says the palace, burning. I, a man, am what I do not say. America, I warn you, if you invite me into your home, I will linger, kissing my beloveds frankly, pulling up radishes and capping all your pens. There are no good kings, only burning palaces. Lose me today, so much. I think I heard the question was sort of for Ilya to talk about what is the Deaf Republic, where is it? Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Okay, so I came to US in '93, and my first book, Dancing in a Jester, was published in 2004. And Dancing in a Jester was very centered on Russian, Ukrainian literary past. And when I came here, I didn't really imagine writing in English so much as writing in images, simply because I didn't have hearing aids when I lived in USSR. I got them when I came here, and I realized that's what the language I was missing. But by the time I was done with that book in 2004, I had to ask myself, do I want to keep doing that? Do I want to, quote unquote, play Russian? Or who am I? And at that point, I wasn't really a Russian boy of 16 who came to this country. I was already dating the woman I would marry, and we spoke English at home. So I was kind of in this refugee space of in the middle. And it took so long to finish this book. I had published different drafts of parts of it, sometimes long parts of it, but I couldn't quite figure out. It felt sometimes too Russian or too American. And then the war in Ukraine started, and then America in America started, or continued. And so at one point, I could find a space that could speak both to Ukraine, where it is now, and to the United States, where it's now, and then I knew the book was done. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. I mean, so the question was sort of about the phenomenological nature of my poems and the relationship to healing. specifically whether I believe that they have the power to be healing for myself or for the reader. Am I understanding that right? I will offer that I think that the highest ambition for my art is that it might be useful to someone. I think that supersedes whatever sort of aesthetic designs that my artist brain has, or whatever sort of professional or literary designs my ego has. But I will also sort of couch that with the caveat that if I was 100% guaranteed that no one would ever read my poems and that I would be no healthier a person for having written them, I would still probably write them. You know, I don't think that the value of writing is, or even, you know, to speak of things like the value of writing sort of still tethers it to late capitalism, but to say, you know, what I get out of writing, or why I write, isn't out of some sort of catharsis or desire for therapy, or, you know, it's a place to put myself. You know, it's the only thing that I've ever been interested in doing with my life. You know, I was talking with a friend before coming here. You know, I'm hopelessly uninterested and unmade to do literally anything else in this world. I'm no, I'm not. I mean, I might be able to like sort of manipulate and con my way through a living in another discipline, but I would not do it with any sort of integrity. I think that, whereas I think that the writing of poetry is so tethered to my understanding of my spiritual development and recovery as a human being, that I think that to neglect it would also be corrosive to my ability to be a husband and to be a friend and to be a son and to be a teacher and to be a person in the world and to be a citizen. You know, yeah, I'm sort of getting farther and farther away from your question, but yeah.
The first question is, I really like writing poetry, but I definitely don't feel like it is like the center or like the locus of like who I am. And I'm wondering, like, as artists, do you feel like there's a world in which like an art form or a particular kind of art form can be super generative, right, for a person, and yet like not be like necessarily the locus, or I should say a space in which like they know, like a person can know that they have another world, right, in which they're happy and valuable and like valuable to themselves, in which like this art form doesn't exist, and still like create a lot in that world. Do you think that's like a possibility? And then the second question is, I guess like in this like sort of literary age of the internet, in some ways like folks are really building their contemporaries, right? As like poets and artists, oftentimes like within 10 years of each other. So for example, like a 13-year-old could like come in contact with your work, right, and become like quote unquote within the next like 30 years or 20 years, become like the poet of the generation, right? And so do y'all ever feel any like pressure or like thought around like building like the next generation of poets, because a lot of them will be like reading your work?
About whether you can sort of cordon off poetry into a special zone of your life and live a perfectly fulfilled life without identifying fully as a poet.
I think we identify fully as human beings. I think being an artist any kind, and I don't even want to use that vocabulary, poet and artist and all that, just working with language is a way of solving metaphysical crisis. And you can create a story, or you can create a song, or you can just create a la 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 la, which somehow is beautiful and makes total sense. That some human will want to keep it and recite it to themselves in the middle of the night because they don't have any other answers to metaphysical questions. What was the second one?
Do you feel a responsibility to sort of be shepherding the next generation of poets?
Go ahead.
Well, I mean, no, I don't feel particularly burdened by the weight of that. I don't think anyone cares what I'm doing with my personal life, or frankly, but no, I mean, I harbor no illusions about what I'm doing in the grand sense. I mean, poetry will be perfectly fine if I never write another word, I will say, though, that, empathy is a function of the imagination, and so it stands to reason then that to be a compassionate person in your living and a rigorously compassionate person in your living to all who may come, whether they're a 13-year-old poet or, a 13-year-old non-poet, it stands to reason that to continually practice empathy will lead to a life that is capable of generating better art. I mean, if we conceive of empathy or compassion as functions of the imagination, then it's not some hoity-toity woo-woo thing. It's like it's a very sort of, it's logical, right? And so I think, if for no other reason than the mercenary idea that being a good person makes you a better poet, I think it behooves one to act as if people are watching.
Being a good person makes you a good person. That's a great ambition to have. I do want to say that in terms of this, speaking to next generation and your generation and all that, I grew up in USSR in the 80s, and that was a time when poets, spoke to stadiums of people and so on and so forth. There were thousands of people coming to the stadium, listening to the voice of the bard and blah, blah, blah. It is bullshit. Poet is a very private person who happens to write beautifully enough, spellbindingly enough, strangely enough, oddly enough, that they can speak privately to many people at the same time. That's what we call a spell. And people carry that spell with them for forever, because they can remember it. Lines like Odin, speaking of empathy, Odin, if the equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. You can build the whole religion on those lines. Hello, up there. If the equal affection cannot be, let the more loving one be me. It would be a great religion. It would be a great constitution if we included that statement in it. And so forth. So those are the kind of spells that help us to go on.
So Emmanuel's question, he said that he really was drawn to the parts in your book where there are characters and they have these relationships with each other, like the husband and wife, or like the parents of the, and he was really drawn to these things. And then he was pointing out how in my book there are similar sorts of connections. And then he asked, what is a love poem? What is a love poem? Is that what you said?
Yeah. What makes a love poem work?
And what makes a love poem work?
Magic. What makes any poem work?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. My reflexive response is to offer some sort of really obnoxious generalization, like, aren't all poems love poems? Which is, bullshit. They're not. But my brain often just sort of feeds me that to avoid thinking. What I will say is that I think that most interesting poetry can be understood through its relationship to bewilderment or through its relationship to defamiliarization. Victor Shklovsky, who we've talked a lot about, his commandment was to make the stone stony, and he demanded that people use art to undo the damage of habitualization, which is to say, we encounter a billion trillion stones every day. How do we return to the stone the nature of its stoniness, right? Walking here, right, we all passed, dozens of cars, right? These angry metal machines that just, go around and somehow this magic of gasoline makes them go forward, and I don't understand it. Maybe some of you do. They're carburetors. But it's very, very strange, right, that we sit in these things. It's very strange that every tree that we passed, is sucking sunlight from a star that lives 93 million miles away and turning that into sugar, right? Turning light from a star 93 million miles away and turning that into matter, right? This is all very strange. And so Viktor Shklovsky says the job of art is to return to the tree its tree-iness, return to love its loviness, return to injustice its injusticiness, right? To undo the damage of habitualization and really make us see the thing, right? And so because we all experience love in the absence of love, and desire in the absence of desire, and death and fear of death. Like, these are universal things that we're always thinking about consciously and unconsciously, right? We become habituated to them. Like, it's very, 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 very strange that we all hope to fall in love with a soulmate who we will either watch die or who we will make watch us die, right? And that's the best case scenario. No, I'm serious, and that's the best case scenario. It's profoundly strange that we all march towards that every day, like hoping against hope that we will find that, right? What a strange thing to hope for, right? And so I think that, again, an interesting love poem to me, or a success, I don't know, the word is a little fraught for me, but I think an interesting love poem for me is one that defamiliarizes me to the experience of the thing that I feel grateful to be so habituated to, right? I've been the beneficiary of many great loves in my life, and many small loves, and so a great love poem helps me to see love in a way that feels new.
Just to come back a little more to language, I think if we're talking about a love poem, we're really talking about an event in language. And so, you go back to Sappho, and you got an event in language, and we only have some fragments from Sappho, right? But they're so precise. And why are they so precise to us even now? I mean, we have Sappho, the remains of Sappho are quotations and letters of politicians. Would you like your poem to remain 1,000 years from now in a letter by, I don't know, Mitch McConnell? Anyhow, what is interesting to me in a love poem, specifically, would be the relationship between an image and tone. And here I'm thinking from Sappho, and I don't know the sound of it, so I'm thinking what remains. And that would be that tension between image and tone. But what I really want to get to is the word tension. I think in order for a love to happen, tension needs to happen. Otherwise, how do you know that it's love? And sometimes it happens even without stating it. Say, I think it was in Homer when a beautiful woman walks in the room. Homer doesn't tell you she's beautiful. She tells you all the men stand up when she walks in the room. So this kind of tension that is built by image and motion that I'm curious.
George wants to know about the ways that we speak and the traditions from which we come. So George speaks Russian, so he thought that maybe the style of your reading was inflected by Brodsky, he said, and who else? And Shevchuk, who I don't know who that is, but and he was curious if we might speak to the ways that
You're definitely a Russian.
I'm Russian.
True. All the Russians in the room stand up.
So he's curious to hear you speak a little bit about that.
And you.
And me too.
No. When they asked John Berman, are you a confessional poet, how do you respond? He said with rage and contempt. To my mind, yes, of course, they're great Russian poets, reading beautifully, but right in front of you is the best reader in America. His name is Fran Bedard. He's a brilliant reader. Truly. I haven't heard anybody better. So what I'm trying to say is it doesn't really depend on a particular tradition as much as on the individual. A poet becomes a poet when they become an individual. And so in English we have Kaminsky who read like nobody else, and you can hear Kaminsky on tape, and it's completely weird and absolutely what the hell is going on, and somehow beautiful. and so many other poets like that. So I wouldn't want to say, oh yeah, great Russian tradition, blah, 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 blah. What I'm trying to say is there is a relationship to a body. Body is a participant, voice is a participant in the poem. And it got to be at the time of your writing it, not just at the time of your performance. The performance doesn't exist for a poet. When I'm reading poems, I'm not really reading them, I'm trying to change my lamp breaks. You know, I'm trying to write with the voice, because otherwise, look, I'm hard of hearing, and I published my books with the interval of 15 years or so. So it's really boring to read the same damn thing over and over again. You start watching a fly. So instead you try to change it. You try to slightly find a different nuance, a different line break, a different punctuation, syntax, and so forth. That way you're still writing it, it's still creative for you. Of course, a lot of it will be similar to the same poem, but there is a chance to change it a little bit, to shake it a little bit.
Yeah, I like that. We have to keep ourselves interested. I didn't read any poems for my book. Yeah, no, first of all, seconding the idea that truly, I mean, and unhyperbolically, the best reader in America is in this room, and they don't have a microphone right now. And so, I mean, you guys have a wealth, and you have a wealth of really, really exciting opportunities to see and study this very phenomenon here. I'll offer that. Yeah, I mean, it's a very embodied thing for me, and I also used to be really self-conscious about the way that I read poetry out loud. I used to stand at the podium and just grip it and be like, don't move like a weirdo, don't move like a weirdo, because it really was, when I was a boy, I'm very sort of obsessively manually gesticulative. I have a strong manual fixation and oral fixation, and so when I was a kid, I would just obsessively play with my hair like this at the dinner table, everywhere. Just I wouldn't think about it. I wouldn't notice that I was doing it until someone pointed it out. I'm the same way now with my facial hair, but I would do it at the dinner table, and my dad would get so mad at me. He would get furious because it looked stupid, and he would be like, why are you doing that, like, nonstop? And so I would sit there at the dinner table being like, don't touch your hair, don't touch your hair, don't touch your hair. And the second I stopped consciously thinking about it, of course I would start doing it again, right? And it's the same way with the reading is, if I am standing up there being like, just read your poem the way that, a Stoic would, I can do that, but then I'm not participating in the poem anymore. I'm reading the poem no differently than any person in this room who got up and read my poem off a page would read it. You know what I'm saying? There is some sort of experience sometimes you get lucky and you really see this again when, not to just keep embarrassing Frank, but you really see this when Frank reads, is there is an initial catalytic energy within the poem that allows the first draft of the poem to be written, and the best readers are able to access some spark of that catalytic energy when they're on the stage, right? It's not the same thing, right? But even the most skeptical writers among us talk about writing and say things like, the hours just flew by, or, such and such a phrase just came to me, right? We mine the language of the supernatural to talk about what happens when we write, right? And when we're standing up there, right, even for these poems that we've read a million times over and over again, between writing them and performing them and this sort of thing, the best readers can catch some little spark of that initial sort of catalytic magic. And then, the rest is just sort of protecting that little spark. The rest is just sort of fanning that. And like Ilya said, it's a very embodied thing. You use your whole body to protect that. I think we have time for one more. I'll let Ilya pick. What's your name?
Ellie.
Ellie? So Ellie nice to meet you, Ellie. Ellie wants to know about how we use repetition, especially as it pertains to making violence feel felt, or sort of making it come through, Yeah, I think that's a beautiful observation. One of the terrible things about the kinds of violence that we're talking about is that it becomes really mundane, is that you just sort of when violence becomes just a pragmatism, you know, we don't go to that market because that's where the drones fly, or you know what I mean, like and I think that there's a way in which repetition can heighten that. I'll also say that, you know, I was reading this article not long ago about how when you put a person under a CAT scan and you say a phrase to them, you say a piece of language to them, the first thing that happens in the brain, and George, you're an actual like person who knows about this sort of stuff, so I apologize for the way that I'm gonna completely butcher this like shitty synopsis of a science article I read. But when you put a person under a CAT scan and say a phrase to them, right, it activates first the sonic receptor part of your brain, right, and then then from there it goes to the language center, and your language sort of decodes what that sonic data meant, right? But if you repeat that same phrase to that person, right, it goes into the sonic center, then into the language center, and then there's also like a little blip in the delight center, in the pleasure center, right? There's a little blip of pleasure, right? Your brain is sort of like, I just did this work, great, save me a second, you know? And I think that this is really interesting because this is knowledge that has, you know, a long theological history. The Sufis waking up every day and saying Allahu Akbar 5,000 times before they roll out of bed in the morning, or, you know, Jewish prayer shuckling. I mean, there are a million trillion theological manifestations of this phenomenon. But poets have also known this forever, you know. Enheduanna, who is the earliest attributable author in all of human literature, was writing in 2500 BC in ancient Sumeria. So the earliest attributable author in all of human literature was an Iraqi woman, by the way. But she was writing these prayers to the goddess Ainana, and she's constantly repeating herself over and over and over. It's all repetition, right? So there is this way that we have known all along that there is something in repetition that leads to a thinning of the membrane between us and the divine. It leads to a kind of delight, which leads to a kind of ecstatic state, which leads to that thinning of the membrane, right? And so I don't think that it's just violence that it allows that in. I think it just makes you more permeable to the entry of whatever sort of emotional cue the skilled poet is delivering, you know what I mean? So for Enheduanna, it was sort of devotion, which for her was actually quite concussive. But, you know, in the cases that you're pointing to, it might have been a violence. But I also think that it can work. Anyway, I'm talking a lot.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for this question. It's a great question because it really gives us a chance to talk about how poetic devices work with emotion. The previous question was about the Russian, and I kind of wanted to go in a different direction because for me it has to do with kind of performance of Russian, and I'm not interested in that. But great question, though. I don't mean it at all. What I do, the reason why I'm raising it is because in this regard I do feel very close to Russian tradition. Simply because, look, around here, you mentioned Joseph Brodsky, great Russian poet, not always well translated into English, but absolutely giant poet. For Brodsky, poetic devices were holy things. But what do we mean when you say that poetic devices are holy? I mean, it can sound so New Age, right? Russian tradition is much, much younger than English tradition. Alexander Pushkin was writing in 1824. He was writing Evgenia Onegin at that time. She's novel and verse. What the hell is 1824 for English literature? Byron was dead by 1824, and who the hell is Byron? You had so many great writers before him. So in some ways, I can understand Brodsky's insistence on this spiritual relationship to devices, because by the time Brodsky began writing in 1964, say, Russian literature was so young. It was less than 200 years old. So there is a little more relationship to what you're talking about, this kind of spell. But I want to go a little bit further with that. What do we mean when we say a spell? I was a very bad anthropology student. I wanted to be an anthropology major. I failed miserably. But I do remember in one of those 101 or so forth anthropology classes, the teacher actually gave us an interesting example. So a bunch of us were on an African continent, a bunch of humans, we didn't have language yet, we just made fire, right? And shaman made that fire and looked at the fire, stupefied, and said, fire, 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 and so forth, until he dropped, okay? And everybody else is like, what just happened? What happened is when language was used for more than just mere delivery of information. Mother Math said poetry is not about an event, it is an event. And that is one of those instances. And these days, anthropology seems to remember it, poets sometimes seem to forget it. What I do want to talk about now that we mention it, is again, there is a danger with every device, a danger of overuse. Repetition can be extremely dangerous, because what's the danger of repetition? If you repeat it, you say it again, it becomes super flat. Obvious, predictable, right? So important poets, good poets, forgive me for using the word successful poets. Whitman, for example, you have this anaphora in the beginning of every line. But that is what everybody who tries to follow Whitman really fail at, because they think that Whitman is about anaphora. I'm sorry, Whitman is not about anaphora. Whitman is about everything that happens in the rest of the sentence. Whitman is about alliteration, about assonance, and how all of that is married to tone. How all of that is delivering what she wants to deliver. His sentences are extremely complex. They embrace you. And that has to do with what he's actually saying. So it's this tension that we talked about earlier between the repetition and everything else in the poem is what I'm interested in.
And to tether that to Emmanuel's question too, right, about the love poem idea, I think the great weapon used to stifle critical thinking in 2019 is just a raw overwhelm of meaningless language, right? Just like constantly bombarding you at every turn, right? It's just meaningless, vapid doublespeak that just completely deadens you to language, right? And so again, when we're talking about the danger of repetition, it's just the repetition of just mindless garbage language, right? And what poetry does is return us to an awareness of the materiality of language and an awareness to language entering us as an active process and our metabolization of language and the speed at which we metabolize language, right? And so there is a sort of inherently political component to just reading. It doesn't even matter the poem doesn't have to be about war or whatever. The poem can be about a happy snowman, right? And it's still a political act to read that poem because it's changing your relationship to language. It's making you aware of your metabolization of language. It's reminding you that there is materiality to language. Rita Dove says the job of the poet is to remind people that language has integrity, right? When you are surrounded by the repetition of this meaningless language and this sort of doublespeak out of this Orwellian doublespeak, right? The poem and the poet can sort of be an antidote to that in a way. Which again, I don't mean to flatten poetry to its utility or to a utility, but I do think that is one sort of nifty side effect of being immersed in it.